Our final speaker of this morning, I have two actual tidbits from. So in addition to probably being able to pick out exactly where in Paris she's from her accent, which you can do, I also have I'm fortunate that I have maintained a relationship with Columbia as an adjunct faculty, so she is also technically my boss. So please give it up with a big warm welcome for Noémie Elhadad.
Hi, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. It's my first time at the symposium, and I really enjoyed it. So I want to tell you today about human-centered AI approaches to endometriosis. And there's three concepts here. One is human, the other is AI, and the third is a condition which maybe you heard about called endometriosis. And because I'm a technologist, I don't know how to... Okay, here we go. So these are my disclosure. I do not have any conflict of interest to disclose. My research funding is so far from the National Library of Medicine and NSF and two fantastic foundations. And I work with a lot of data, some data that I collect, some data that I have in my institution, and some from startup like Clue, which is a menstrual tracker, and other from this very large international data network called Odyssey. So I'm going to talk about endometriosis, but I want to kind of step back a little bit because endometriosis is a women-specific, female-specific condition, and it's hard to talk about female-specific conditions without thinking about the overall context of women's health. And if I had to summarize the issues, I would say that there are multiple, it's multifactorial, that's what we say when something is complicated. There's multiple interrelated phenomena that are at the intersection of sex, gender, and medicine. And if you want to learn more about it in a lay fashion, I actually recommend this 40-page fantastic report from McKinsey and the World Economic Forum. They go at it from the economic opportunities. Apparently, there's a $1 trillion opportunity here in femtech, but they really explain fantastically well what the issues are. We talk often of this data gap in women's health. There's not enough data to describe women's health and health of women. By that we mean the sex differences. Heart attacks present differently in men and women, but we also mean diseases that are prevalent more in women, so autoimmune conditions, for example, and then women-specific conditions, one of them being endometriosis. This data gap is real. Until the 90s, women were excluded from most clinical trials. In fact, in the 70s, FDA had explicitly forbidden women to be in part of clinical trials. So we talked about small molecules and dosage. There's a lot we don't know about how drugs, for example, act in women's body. This data gap brings a knowledge gap, and that also brings a care gap. So I also like, when I talk about women's health, to give example of some articles that you might want to read if you're interested in the topic, that talk about why it's so strange that we don't know as much as we should about women. And so these are two papers that I really like. They came out at the same time, about 5 years ago. One of them actually is written by Judy Rugensteiner, who has a fantastic women's health center at Anschutz. And if, one quote that I like is, research highlights the myriad ways sex and gender play a role in health and disease. So that sounds good, we are aware of it. However, these clinically relevant insights have yet to be systematically incorporated in care. We also have a lot of researchers who have looked at it not from the biomedical science standpoint, but more of a sociological standpoint, and trying to understand why is it that women do not get the care that they should get? And these two papers are absolutely fantastic. One of them talks about this paradoxical reason to why women are not taken care of the way they should be in care. The first one is, well, we don't need to include women in research because women are the same as men. They're humans. The second one is, no, women are so complicated. We can't handle them, and so we're not going to look at them. The last point that I want to make is if there was a lot of ignorance around women's health, there's one particular piece of women's health that's even less known, which is menstruation and menstrual health. These two papers are fantastic papers, again, that talk about how women's health concerns are generally underrepresented, but reproductive health in particular has been hampered by a lack of understanding of basic uterine and menstrual physiology. Okay, so here we are. We don't know a lot about women's health, and it's multifactorial. I'm a computer scientist and a biomedical informaticist, and my question is, like everyone else who does AI, can AI help here? Maybe I can go and solve all of these issues all at once, because I'm a technologist and I always think that I can solve all of the issues that people have been working on for so long. Maybe data, new data, because there is a data gap, but maybe also existing data can help. And maybe AI and maybe technology, doesn't even need to be smart, can help here. And the hope is that it can help us understand or elucidate a little bit, disentangle the role of sex and gender in health, identify new knowledge maybe, but more importantly, create actionable solutions to support women and their health. But we also know as technologists that data and AI can be very dangerous. And so they add a layer of complexity to the issue. We want these to be for good. How do we make them happen to work for these goals and at the same time not make the situation worse? And my whole story, if you want to stop listening to the talk, no, the only thing I want you to remember is that we're going to need to have humans be deeply, deeply integrated in this research project, and human-centered approaches are going to help us get there. So I'm going to talk now about endometriosis. This is the quote-unquote official definition of endo. Endometriosis is a condition where tissue similar to the lining of the uterus, the endometrium, grows outside of the uterus. So usually it's inside the uterus, that's what gets shed during menstruation, and it grows outside, and we don't know why. And what happens is that it attaches itself to various organs, ovaries, fallopian tubes, ligaments, and even the bowel and bladder. Okay, endometriosis sounds the way I described it to you maybe, very mechanistic, right? It is because it's a women-specific condition. It's underfunded, understudied, understood. Underfunded until 2 years ago, the national NIH budget for endometriosis research was $7 million a year, which is, I'm proud to say, less than my annual budget in my department. It's estimated to be 6 to 10% of women in reproductive age. We say estimated because we don't even know how to find people who have endometriosis. While the definition that I gave you is very mechanistic, maybe, the way it translates itself in patients is through debilitating symptoms, subfertility, and now we're understanding to be actually a systemic condition with an inflammatory aspect. There's no cure to it, there's no biomarker to it, so it's hard to diagnose and it's hard to monitor. And on average, 6 to 7 years of delay in diagnosis. So the delay, when we say that, it's from the moment a patient starts saying, I think something's wrong, to getting to a diagnosis. And it takes, on average, up to 10 doctors visited in the United States to get to an official diagnosis. Because there's no cure, getting the diagnosis is nice. People feel a little bit less crazy when they have it because they're like, I knew something was wrong, but there's actually not a whole lot of treatments for it. The treatments are mostly surgical, and treatments tackle symptoms like pain. So what do I want to do here? I want to tell you about, if it's understudied, I'm going to need to find ways to characterize the disease. The way we described it so far is, the physiological maybe. Is there a way to describe it that can help us understand better the systemic aspect of the condition, and also because I want to include in it the patient voice, can I characterize it in a way that patients can recognize themselves in it? So I want to be both scientific and I want to be have a human aspect to this as well, and I think we can do both at the same time. Because there's a lag to diagnosis, I think, and in fact most patients demand this, we need to find ways to do earlier detection of the disease. So not prediction. There are evidence that there is disease in this person. How can we detect this faster than after 7 years of waiting? And finally, because there is no cure and there is no treatment, and there's not a whole lot of evidence for what to do for self-management, could we support women on their day-to-day self-management techniques? So it's a long career, long type of goals, but that's what I'm going to attempt to tell you about today. So the first thing I'm going to describe to you is a project that I started about 5 years ago and was going at this data gap issue in endometriosis, which was that most of the data about endometriosis that exist in science is either very basic science or is about surgery, the surgeries that was done and the pathology and the histological analysis of the lesions that were taken during surgery. And patients don't recognize themselves in this. And in fact, the staging of the disease does not correlate with the symptoms of patients. So someone could be a stage 4 and be asymptomatic, and someone could be a stage 1 and be told, this is okay, you don't have any problem, and have years of infertility and debilitating pain. And so this disconnect is what we're trying to get away from right now. So we built this community of patients called Citizen Endo, Endo for endometriosis, citizen because we want to use principles of citizen science, which basically means participatory design, a true partnership between patients and researchers, where patients figure out what questions they care about, researchers talk and interact with patients and design together solutions. And the primary goal of this project was to create data that could help reflect the lived experiences of endometriosis, but also help us do analysis of this thing. Of course, if we want to get data from patients, we need to find ways to engage them. And so there's all sorts, I'm an AI person, but suddenly here I am doing advocacy work and talking on TV and doing Reddit Ask Me Anything, and working with a whole lot of patient advocacy group. The other thing that I've done, which helped a lot, because endometriosis is a very stigmatized condition, is to disclose my own diagnosis of endometriosis to patients. And so, it took some time, but now I'm very happy to tell you all about my periods and how fantastic they are. And I can show you my cat and how my cat is helpful when I have a flare-up. So we built an app. We built this app together with patients. And it sounds simple to build an app. And it's like, yeah, of course, there's an app for everything. Okay, yes, true. It was a lot of work, though. This is a research app. So there's an IRB. There's an Ascent for people that are above 13-year-old and are not adults yet. And everything is HIPAA certified. How did we build it? If we don't know a lot about the disease, what would we track about the disease? How would we know what to ask patients? Well, we went at it in a very human-centered fashion, where we did a lot of interviews, focus groups with patients, and then we went on Reddit and did NLP, natural language processing, of all of the online discussions to get a sense of the landscape of symptoms that people have. And so the app that we build asks a whole lot of questions, and you can go and answer them as many times as you want during a day, or never if you want, and come back every month, whatever makes sense to you. Every aspect of this app was decided with patients, up to this exact shade of red, which is not pink, but a little bit like pink. There's also a whole lot of information we ask about if people have access to their surgical reports. We ask about it. We ask for, of course, all of their past medical history, etc., etc. And we have this citizen tab, which is where we communicate back and forth with patients and tell them about various studies. So what do we get when we have new data and tools? Well, the hope is to get new insights. So I'm going to, this is kind of a preview of the next slides. There's going to be human-centered insights, AI and tech insights, and then some endometriosis insights. The first one is that the good news, maybe for scientists, is that people who have stigmatized conditions, or people who are typically dismissed in their care, are eager to contribute to science. And so that's good. We can leverage that. But they're also very angry, and they have a lot of mistrust. And so we have to be very respectful, and we have to be very good at building a trust relationship with patients. Mobile health, these apps are a very powerful way of engaging with people day to day. And so, I'm sure there are fantastic surveys and studies that are observational where they go to patients and you receive a survey every 6 months, maybe every month, and you're asked, in the past 3 months, how have you been feeling? For conditions like endometriosis, I'll show you some data in a second, it gets very hard to answer these questions because day-to-day things change. And so these kind of data collection tools are very helpful in capturing the complexity of the disease. There are methods that we can use from AI to make sense of all of this data that we collect. And we want to be very careful, obviously, because we know that if we collect data from an app, this is in no way the truth. This is not physiological data. This is not, this is just what someone tells us they feel. And so we have to be very careful at validating whatever we can, but also making sure that this app does not introduce any new artifact in the data in how we understand what's happening with the disease. And finally, those are actually strangely complex patterns that we find, and so AI has good methods for that. From an endo standpoint, we were able to show that endometriosis was extremely systemic and was really a whole body issue, also highly heterogeneous, which is maybe not surprising. When a disease is estimated to be 10% of a population, we know it's going to not look the same in every person. And finally, especially thanks to this app and its temporal aspect, we were able to show the very strong temporal relationship of the disease. So some papers that describe some of this work, this is a paper that describes how we found how to go into citizen science as a way to engage. In mobile health, a big question is people are very excited when they download the app. They use it for 2 days and then they stop, and maybe you have this experience yourself. So here we're looking at, for example, how long do people stick to the app? Do they use it? Do everybody use it the same way? What is a good metric to tell us that someone is engaged? How much data do we need from someone for it to tell us that we've learned about the disease of someone? And so there's all sorts of interesting patterns. What we found is that what we call the usuals and the regulars, if they use it for 12 weeks, they're going to use this for years. And so we have people who have been literally using this every day, if not every week, for 5 years now. This is kind of a collective picture of what we see in our patients. There's a lot of pelvic pain, which is not surprising, but it really, I'm sure you can see here, it really goes all around. As soon as we had about 4,000 participants, we now have about 19,000 of them. We started doing some AI on it because that's what we do. And so this is what we found. We asked what are the patterns of what people report to us, and we found 3 clusters of presentations. And so we call them bad, manageable, and good. The good one is not that great, to be honest with you. But I'm not going to go into it. But the point here is, again, that it's extremely systemic and it has an impact on pain, but also all sorts of other symptoms. And functionally, like we ask a lot of functional questions. What can you do today? Were you able to have sex? Is it painful, etc.? It also has a lot of consequences. This is a temporal aspect of the disease. These are just looking at pain, week-to-week variations, and my point here is that it changes a lot. And when we applied our AI methods to the entire population, I'm on the top right here, you're seeing about maybe 10 patients through time, so this is 50 weeks of tracking, and it goes from like a status of like, you're doing okay this week to this week is really bad. And the point here is that everyone looks different. And the second point is that there's a lot of variations. People might know that endometriosis is sometimes talked about as unbearable periods. And what we find is that, yeah, periods are bad, but they're actually not correlated to the severity of symptoms. So it is systemic in time as well. Okay, so those were our or insights from having new types of data with new tools and lessons learned about how we want to engage with patients. But we also know that we have existing data. The first talk this morning gave us actually a great way to introduce all of them, all of this EHR data, electronic health record data, and claims data. I'm very aware they're not the truth again. There's this weird representation of the truth where it's a clinician who decided to document something about a patient. And so speaking about women's health, where there's a lot of dismissal of symptoms, etc., there is a question here, which is, are we going to find any signal about the symptoms of women when they are on the way of being diagnosed to endometriosis? And so that's kind of the question we're asking here. Can we characterize endometriosis from this data? So one example we've done is we looked at 9 databases in the United States, about 188 million women. And out of those, we carved 2 million women who were identified with endometriosis. You might want to ask me, but how did you know they had endometriosis? Just tell you in a second. But before, I'll give you some just preview of what we've learned. So, well, how we define a disease changes who gets diagnosed. It sounds very trivial, but has very, very important consequences in what we're going to find when we analyze our data. Large data networks are very helpful. These 188 million people we analyze, we can do this only because we have all of these data networks to look for, and they allow us to validate our analysis because they're very different data sites. Some are like government-issued, commercial-issued insurance. Some are geographic different sites. And the good news is that even though there is a very long lag to diagnosis, there is actually a signal, we think, in these data. There is something that maybe clinicians cannot or are not well equipped at connecting the dots, but there are the dots. And so the hope here is obviously that AI is going to be able to connect them for us. And finally, from an endometriosis standpoint, we also see the systemic aspect of the condition, not at the same granularity as these mobile apps, but we also see it, and we see that it's a highly comorbid condition. So back to this question, how do we know who has endometriosis? So this question of selecting a cohort from a large database is a very interesting research question. It's called phenotype definition in our field, and there's a lot of work in it. In our case, we went through as a traditional definition of endometriosis, which says people who have surgery and had a confirmation through their path report, they're going to have endo. But what happened is 2 years ago, the European Society for Human Reproduction and Human Reproductive Endocrinology completely changed the guidelines. They said, nope, surgery is not the way to diagnose endometriosis. Why is that? Because it's very hard to get access to surgery. So we want to recognize women who suffer before they get this surgery, and so we're going to do it symptoms-based. And so they came up with 5 symptoms that could indicate that you have endometriosis. And so there's this great question, which is, okay, well, we analyzed some data where we thought we knew who had endometriosis. It's the people who have surgery. But now you're telling me there are other people who don't get the surgery that have the disease. Could we go and look at them? So this is a paper that's describing all of it. And the only thing I want to point out here is that it's a crazy Venn diagram where basically when you shift definitions, and there's various versions of those definitions, you see very different populations. And you see this interesting thing in particular, which is that there's different ages. People who get access to the surgery are just older. It just takes them time to get to the surgery. And so it's a good thing that there is this shift of definition. But what's interesting to think about is that we don't want to shift completely, because there are people who got the surgery and have endometriosis, but who had never any symptom documented. So these were the people who were not heard by the system, had maybe accidental, surgery. There's a lot of those, hysterectomies, for example, and we want to capture them as well. We don't want to only get the people that have the documentation. So I'm going to go very quickly through this, but my point here is that there is a signal, and that's excellent news for us. Okay, so if there is a signal, could we go and do early detection? So I want to give you one example of a patient. This is real data, anonymized patients. The dates are not real. And this is a patient that shows up at the ED. That's the red little box on the top left. The main problem they have basically that is documented in the electronic health record. You can see it in that cloud. And what's under it are the notes, the clinical notes that are talking about this information. And does it look like an endometriosis patient? No. It looks like a GI patient, someone who has poor sleep, okay, GERD, nausea, vomiting, cramping, pain. 6 months later, completely different signature of symptoms: endometriosis, vaginal bleeding, abdominal pain, etc., etc. So what happened? The person got diagnosed. And so that's something we see a lot in clinical documentation, and maybe the MDs in the room might agree, is that it's really not the truth. The person had the symptoms all along, but knowledge of the diagnosis changes what gets documented. And so that's fantastic. Now we can see all the symptoms of endometriosis. Could we have guessed 6 months ago or 2 years ago that the patient had endo? That's kind of what we want to get at. So, and that's what we did. We went back all the way to 3 years, and we said, could we have guessed that this person had endo? And it gave us a lot of really good, promising results. So now we're at the stage where we, with New York Presbyterian and some help from the Foundation of Women's Health, we are going to test this hypothesis. We're about to deploy a clinical decision support system such that when someone goes to the emergency department, women with endo go 3 times more than other women to the ED for pain. We are going to look at the longitudinal record, run this early detection model, and say, maybe this patient needs to be referred to specialty gynecology. Because I don't know how it is in Colorado, in New York, it takes about 6 months to get an appointment to specialty gynecology. Those 6 months are really good for us. We can ask the patient or suggest to the patient to download the app and tell us how they feel. And these 2 pieces of information, what's inside the clinical documentation and what's in this app, we know, because we've done some studies already, are going to be very helpful in getting closer to a diagnosis. So we're very excited about this. I want to tell you very, very quickly about self-management. We don't have a lot of AI solutions that work yet, but what we've spent a lot of time doing is thinking about how do we make AI not harmful here. This is really critical. We know this is where there's maybe not going to be an expert in the loop, which is we want to help women day-to-day manage their disease and maybe predict their flare-ups, help them prevent things. And there might not be an expert involved, but we want to be able to be helpful anyway. So we really want to make sure we're not doing anything bad. Why is it difficult? It's, in general, chronic disease management is really difficult. It's a known thing. It's I would say, one of the biggest deals in chronic disease. But here it's even more difficult because there's no way to monitor. There's no biomarker to monitor. I can't look at my glucose values to tell me how well I'm doing. There's no management guidelines available. Some of our patients in our focus group told us, I don't know, should I put honey on my hair? Would that help? I have no idea. Maybe it would. I don't think it would. There are obstacles to communications. We have a fantastic paper, if you're bored and want to read something, on all of the ways in which clinicians and patients are misaligned in values and in expertise and in ways of communicating with each other in endometriosis management. Okay, so we asked a lot of questions to women, and all of these are very helpful in us designing AI interventions. On the left, I'm showing you one paper that we presented at CHI 2 weeks ago, which is how do we do this human-centered AI technology for predicting a flare-up. Patients told us, if you could tell me even 2 days in advance that in 2 days I'm going to have to stay in bed, that would help me tremendously. And so how can we do this? And one of our hypotheses here is that if you record your voice, you can actually detect changes in how your voice is and could tell you that you're starting to feel bad. If you want to know how I know this, because I'm French, my mom lives in France, and she could tell me when I call her, she would tell me, you're not doing well. And I would be like, I am doing fantastic. I don't know what you're talking about. And then she would, she would be right. 2 days later, I would be sick. And we heard it a lot from other patients. And so we're looking a lot into this. The paper on the right is about using reinforcement learning in an online fashion to learn from someone's behavior what works and what doesn't work for it. So what have we learned from these experiences? People need and want to have AI help them. In fact, they would like it better than having humans help them. They tell us things like, AI can hear me better than my doctor. Showing my data could give me a voice, and a doctor would believe the data better than they believe me. But they also want to have control, and that's a very important principle in AI. We want to go away from algorithmic-centric suggestions to having really an interactive system where patients can decide and explore recommendations. Privacy is a huge deal, and security is a huge deal. I don't have to tell you that reproductive rights are endangered nowadays, and so in the States a lot, but throughout the world, patients are worried. And then trust in algorithms and who designs those algorithms is a big deal. And finally, and maybe that's a bit of something we need to pay attention to as AI researchers, is that patients maybe have low literacy in AI. And so they assume that AI is going to be safe for them. AI has common sense and maybe even understands them better than they think they do. And we have to really be careful when we present suggestions to remind people that, no, this is just a very dumb machine that came out with this idea. So I want to end by saying that there are many other women's health conditions, and there's even like natural phenomena like menstruation, menopause, where we can use a similar approach, and in fact, we've started to. So thank you again for listening to me. I want to thank all the people who are helping and all the patients who have given us their voice. Thank you.
Thank you, Noémie. As always, I'm always so inspired by the work that you've done and how you've built a community to gather data and give people a voice. It's just, I think about your project all the time, so I really appreciate that. And then I see we got a question up here, and then a hand raised down here.
Me, thank you. Excuse me, thank you very much. Have you, could you speak to how women with endometriosis affects relationships and partners in relationship, and also what can partners do to be supportive?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's been a lot of research, and if I may say, there's been more research on like the impact on husbands than there's been on women sometimes, so I'm just gonna say it. No, you're right to ask. I like the way you said it at the end, especially. But it really affects everyone, right? Like, and so it's a big deal. The foundations, there's been a number of foundations that popped up throughout the world. I want to say that somehow timing has been fantastic, because in the past 5 years there's been tremendous increase of awareness about the disease thanks to the work of foundations. And so foundations do have like toolkits about like partner, how can you help your partner to help with endometriosis, and kids, how do you deal when your mom is like not able to get out of bed. So there's starting to get some ideas about that. Yes. Thank you.
Thanks so much for your talk. Quick question:
Have
you or anyone thought about testing biomarkers in menstrual blood? And could you comment on the opportunity there? Because I think there's a huge opportunity space there.
Absolutely. So there are a few people who are thinking about this, and you're right. I think we're gonna find something. The people at Northwell are looking into this, and then there is a startup. There's several startups, but one of them that actually just got some NIH funding, which is a feat in women's health nowadays, on a smart tampon that can collect menstrual effects, and then you send it back and you look at potential biomarkers. What I hear is, and something that happens a lot in all of these studies, is that it's hard to know who does not have endometriosis, because the definition is actually fuzzier than I made it sound. It's a little difficult, but I think it's a very exciting avenue for sure.
Hello. So my question is that there is an association between endometriosis and autoimmune diseases, specifically celiac diseases. And I was curious if, in your work, if you noticed any other associations similar to that. Is that something you would like to look into? And yeah, that's my question. Thank you for such a lovely talk.
Yeah, there are. So it's controversial. Some people don't agree with the findings, and I'll tell you why in a second. But we have a paper that's about to come out actually on looking at I think like 5 large databases, and so it's kind of like epidemiological kind of study, and we find a strong correlation with many autoimmune conditions. We tried to look at it to try to think about the reason why people don't believe there is one, which is this question of misdiagnosis. Autoimmune conditions are hard to diagnose, endometriosis is hard to diagnose. People get a lot of misdiagnoses on their way of getting the diagnosis. And so how do we believe that, what we find is really a signal versus someone was like, yeah, you have celiac. Oh no, sorry, you have endo. Sorry, you have lupus. I'm making it up, but so we tried to kind of come up with some strategies about it. Some of them being temporal, before diagnosis, after diagnosis, etc. We keep finding an association, and there's a paper that actually just came out this week again that looked at a very different data set that also found some associations with autoimmune conditions.
Hi over here. I think you already kind of covered the question, but I was wondering what the comorbidities had taught you about the disease.
Yeah. And because I'm obsessed about the patient voice in all of this work, I'm going to answer it first by saying that the way we think about the comorbidities is really important because it changes the definition of the disease. I think there's this switch from it's a reproductive condition that affects only the pelvic and is a surgical condition to it's an inflammatory condition that is systemic, has a lot of consequences in stigmatization, in funding, in everything. And so what we find is that it is, and I'm not the only one who says it by any chance, by any way, that it's really inflammatory in nature, and it's probably going to be an autoimmune condition, but there's no basic science expertise to that matter yet.
Thank you, Noémie. Christopher. This is kind of a layman's question, and part of it is what's the most valuable substance to humans on the earth? To kind of preface that, I'm a fan of a program, Doug Kaufman, Know the Cause, and he's really into funguses. And there's supposedly some 300 known funguses that can infect the human body, but those are just the known ones. And I was just kind of wondering what part pathogens might play in that. I know there's a genetic component probably that might make us more vulnerable than others to one thing or another.
Yeah.
And then the part of stem cells is that in the reproductive system and all of that, I know stem cells, it's been kind of squashed because of religious biases one way or another. You can spend $5,000 and you can get the embryonic, the blood stem cells. I forget the name of what they're called. That's supposed to be the real deal if you can afford it. But so that's the question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So there are there's a lot of hypotheses right now, and we don't have any answers yet. We know there's a hereditary component. We know that GWAS studies are not super successful, which makes sense. Again, the common variants are not maybe the way to go here. And there is a lot of hypotheses around the exposome in general and the fact that there are estrogen disruptor, and the impact on young girls in particular. So I think I'm not answering fully your question, but I think the point is that the field is wide open, and so if anybody's looking for a disease to look at, it's a fun condition.
Is endometriosis is the cure for it pregnancy?
I'm still looking for who's like, thank you.
Oh,
all the other speakers were really good at this. Okay.
Is the cure for endometriosis still pregnancy? I suppose Elon Musk would be happy about this with his pronatalism, but yeah, exactly. But and I presume it's intuitive why that's the case. Would there be a thought that there's any way to induce some pregnancy markers that could cause the endometrial,
Yeah.
And then
there
was another thing though too. And what's the reason what's the benefit of early detection other than knowing that you're going to go through hell?
Yeah, no, you're right. It's a good question. Personally, I was diagnosed at age of 13. Didn't really help me, but I did feel like I knew what I was talking about when I was talking to my doctor. So there is a validating aspect to getting early detection. The other validating aspect is that you maybe don't have to start some treatment without knowing if it's going to work or not work, and you can just try different things a little bit earlier. So there is some values to it. And the last one is, and that's the surgeons talking, is that it is a progressive disease, and so sometimes the lesions are such that it changes your anatomy, and so if you catch it a little bit earlier, it is still helpful. Back to your question about pregnancy, so it is considered a myth that it cures endometriosis, but people have seen a decrease in symptoms, and so during pregnancy, and so one of the primary treatments, the first-line treatment, is to suppress the menstrual cycle, to suppress hormones. Those are not easy on women. Like, there's a lot of teenagers who are in artificial menopause right now, and it's not pleasant. The other small issue is that we actually don't know who is responsive and who's not. So some subset of people respond very, very well to this, and others still have symptoms. So lots of questions around that.
All right, Larry has promised to be very
really
fast.
brief, although I suspect the answer might be long.
I'll try to be brief.
Noémie, this was a wonderful talk. Thank you for bringing women's health issues to Gold Lab Symposium in the great way that you do. My question is about your own relationship to the disease, which you shared with us, and what role that played in how you chose the human-centered approach and how you deal with patients and how you conceive of the research. Can you tell us a little bit about how your journey made this, your scientific and technical work, how it informed it?
Yeah. I appreciate that question. In 6 seconds, I can I'm just going to say that for about, 42 years of my life, I tried very hard not to think about my disease and would not tell anybody that I have my disease. And then I realized that wasn't the way to go. And it's very liberating to actually work on the thing that no one else cares about. Because if you don't, no one else is going to do it. And it turns out that most of the endometriosis researchers are all openly, endometriosis patients. And so the hope here is that there are people who don't have endometriosis that are going to start working on this disease. That's all I'll say for now.
Thank you, Noémie.